Well, good afternoon. We're just waiting for people to join. We have, in theory, nearly 500 people joining this webinar, and I think it would be courteous just to give them a minute whilst everyone scrolls in. So if you will wait for a minute, I'll then start introducing people any second. Okay, well, look, we have nearly 200 people signed up or arrived. We had nearly 500 people signed up. And I really want to just welcome all the people attending to this webinar, which is going to be concentrating on the North American group market for Europe. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Adele Youngs, who is the owner of Life Travel and Tours, but she's just been elected the Vice President of SYTA, which is the schools grouping for North America, which I'm sure Adele will be happy to explain a bit more and better than I can. And Jennifer Tombaugh, who is an old friend of the association, like Adele, and she's done webinars with us in the past. She's the president of Tauck, one of the premium tour operators in North America. If I may just start with a remark as people are still scrolling in. The group tourism is famously a shrinking proportion of the visitors coming from North America, and it has been really for 40 years. Nevertheless, it still has maintained the same aggregate volume of people that have been coming over to Europe over the last 40 years. And if you look at various aspects of group tourism, particularly if you widen it to include river cruising, it really has been very, very solid and substantial part of the tourism mix over in Europe. The other thing I'd really stress is that group tourism has a bright future. You will find that in broad terms, the demographic that chooses to go on group tourism or chooses to go on group tours is growing. And we've got the two demographics, important demographics represented here. I wouldn't say for one moment that Tauck is exclusively the older end of the age bracket, but certainly what Adele represents, which is the youthful end of the age bracket, is also a very, very important component of group tourism. So we in group tourism, we have both the expanding, ever expanding senior market and the junior market as well. And the virtues of the junior market, of course, is that first-time visitors, which they almost exclusively are, become second and third and fourth time visitors as well. So there are no more important clients than those. Right, well, now that we've got nearly 250 people here, I think I'll just turn to Adele to start off with. And I also wish to stress that we don't want to wallow in what's happened to us in 2020. I think everybody in the audience is only too well aware of what's hit the industry, but I think it's probably worth at least recognizing what's happened. Adele, can you tell us what the situation is as far as your student market, youth and student market is concerned? And do tell us a little about SYTA as well.
Great, thank you, Tom. Thanks everyone for attending. So SYTA is the Student Youth Travel Association based in North America, but focusing on a global sector, really representing, as Tom said, the beginning of the group market, which is essentially school travel, school and university travel, where the organizer is the teacher or educator. So it's an interesting market because there are lots of clients involved in it. There's the teacher, who's primarily the decision maker, but there's also the students and finally the parents, who are the ones who are actually paying for it. So there are a lot of different stakeholders involved in deciding on the travel. And as Tom said, without wallowing in the situation, as with every sector, I think that this sector is affected just as badly as everybody else. So one of the interesting things about our market is that the travel times, the peak times, tend to be around spring break, so February, March into April, and then end of May into June when the school year in North America ends. So those are the peak times. So obviously the timing of what happened this year with the pandemic meant that we'd barely got started before everything stopped. So that's the situation. And what would normally happen on the cycle for this sector is that we would be looking around that time of the year for booking for the following year. So spring 2020 would have been a booking time for starting that process for 2021, because a lot of the schools would want to get their products, their itineraries, their school trips out to the parents before the school summer holiday. And then the second time for the booking time is really September, October, when the schools go back. So that would again be for this year, would have been for 2021. So the impact on our sector has been significant in that a lot of the schools in North America didn't go back fully, at least not face-to-face, in August when the schools returned. And the teachers that would ordinarily have been planning trips were dealing with virtual lessons, our kids coming back, how is that all working? And so one of the challenges we're finding particularly is that planning cycle has been completely disrupted for 2021, which makes, I think, what we're going to come on to talk to you about planning for 2022 really important, because there is limited scope now for school travel anyway in 2021 that wasn't already being planned before the pandemic started. So there are still, on a positive note, there are still teachers planning for 2021, but they generally will have needed to start that process much earlier rather than waiting until this particular autumn period.
Jennifer, how would you assess what's happened this year?
Yeah, I'd echo much of the same. So this is our 95th anniversary year. So this was to be our best year ever in the history of the company in performance, and we were on track up until early March, when everything is pretty much shut down for the world. And while there might be a hope or two lingering in December of this year, 2020 for the most part has been closed for us. And we look forward to 21. And I want to echo what Tom said about a bright future. I think to sum it up, there's great demand, but there's great uncertainty. And Adele just spoke of this certainly in the student market, which is very much fraught by that schedule that's been completely disrupted. But that's true for our guests as well. We did finally drop our first printed brochure since March. Just a couple of weeks ago. It was a combined North America-Europe program, and we saw calls coming in and we saw demand happening, and people are wanting to plan, they're eager to plan, but they're hesitant to go. We still see Europe as our #1 destination. Within Europe, Italy is still our #1 destination, which when you think back to March and what was on the front pages of the paper here in the US, it's really tough to believe. But we see a brighter future. I think it's going to be longer out, sort of in 2022 or 23, as we see a fuller recovery. But there are folks out there eager to go, but the uncertainty, particularly around health and safety and consistency of policy and plan, is what's holding them back.
Yeah, I think the point you're making is really valid. But presumably, what we're both talking about is the fact that everything that we had in 2020 effectively cancelled, or nearly everything we had was cancelled. Now, how much of those people who cancelled, did they just rebook? Did they get a refund? Did they say, okay, we're definitely coming in 2021 and we're definitely coming in 2022? Have we got sort of almost a pot of demand that we've got sitting back in 2020 unused that we can move forward into 21? Is there 21 is probably not the right year for you in that respect, Adele, but is there a sense that people are saying, look, we can't do it then, we're going to do it later, you've got our booking?
Absolutely, and exactly as Jennifer said, there is the demand and the desire to travel hasn't gone away at all. Especially for our sector, travel has become over the years such an important part of school teaching and leading on through university and then beyond. It's become something people are accustomed to doing it's a sort of rite of passage. And I think that's one of the sort of saddest things about the groups that we saw that cancelled for this spring, was that it was in many cases the senior year trip. So it was the last chance for them all to go with their friends before they all go off to whatever they do after that. And that's the sad thing, is that that was missed, and in many cases will not happen, certainly not in the way that would have happened in the past this coming year in 2021. And I think that's really important, because as soon as people can get back to that, I think they want to. So that's the first thing. It's still, as Jennifer says, Europe is still the top destination for international student trips. That's really important to remember. And so to go to your question of what cancelled and what postponed, some did postpone, absolutely, because people plan a long time, they fundraise, especially this sector, the kids fundraise for sometimes 2 years to earn the money for the trips. So that's all in place. So in a lot of cases, things are postponed. But then again, the other challenge is that, of course, a lot of the kids will have moved up a year in school. So a lot will already have left and gone to university or whatever they were going to do afterwards. And so that's a challenge. So there is postponed business, but it's still up in the air as well in terms of planning. Exactly as Jennifer says, you know, what will it look like? How will it be? And to be honest, the refund process for big groups where there were students and parents and schools and school attorneys and school districts involved was incredibly complicated. And I think that's something we'll come on to, but it's something that as an industry we have to look at how we deal with contracts and terms and conditions and things, because that will have, I don't want to say damaged the perception of the industry, but it hasn't helped in terms of recovery in a speedy sense. We've got to work on some of that before lots of parents will be happy to put down $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on their child's trip.
You mean there are real scars there, you're saying, that people carry?
There are, because I think one of the key things, which is an opportunity for us in this sector, is, but was also a challenge, was a lot of parents who are the people who are paying for the trip ultimately hadn't understood how the whole process works. And I think with our sector, it's much more removed. You know, they book through the school, so they're not thinking about the tour operator, the airline, the supply chain that comes after that. And so a lot of people will have expected 100% refunds, and obviously that wasn't possible in many cases for reasons we all know and understand. But so there is going to need to be a process of transparency and flexibility that will come, and I think that would be the same with any traveller, whether they're group or FIT as well. I think as an industry we have to look at how we move forward with that as we progress into 21, definitely.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think your point about agility and learning and a more educated consumer going into 21 is spot on. You know, we started back in March, where we did what we always did. If people wanted to refund or rebook, that was fine, and we handled that. And what we quickly realized is there was a great opportunity of people who did want to travel in the future, but we provided an incentive for them to do it. So we've retained actually more than half of our bookings in 2020 into 21 or 22, with the vast majority into 21. And the way that we did that is by offering an incentive. So about 40% have rebooked already, and the balance are in something called the Tauck travel wallet. So we offered an encouragement that if they kept their deposits with us and with the hope of traveling in the future, we provided a financial incentive to do that. And that is proving now that people are as our brochure has dropped, that has provided that ability to an encouragement to move forward and proceed with the bookings. But I think this gets back to what you say about trying and learning. I mean, this was obviously, we all know, completely unprecedented. And as an industry, we're learning how to pivot and be that flexible, agility, flexibility, optionality, all those ITY words have been deployed, I think, multiple times across everyone I talk to in this industry, because it is that learning and that understanding of how is the consumer changed, what are their needs, what's the overall feedback that we can provide that would make them feel comfortable, is as an industry where we'll need to go to encourage that retention rate to even go higher.
I ought to mention, thank you so much, Jennifer. I ought to mention that there is a possibility for the people on this, watching this webinar, to pose questions. You've got a question function there, and I'll be scrolling through that regularly, if only to provide some other questions other than the ones I've got lined up already. But I mean, look, we've covered the current situation. We've discussed how a number of the people who were supposed to be coming this year have rebooked for next year. I suppose the real question to you is, do you think there's going to be any traffic before a vaccine? We don't know when a vaccine's coming, but a lot of people assume that a vaccine's going to be available, widely available, sometime in Q2 of next year, and that it will start having an impact in Q3. And do you think that's a sensible supposition, Adele?
I think probably yes. I think a lot of that, though, is down to factors we can't control as an industry, that is to do with government restrictions on travel and quarantine, and how that impacts on testing and or a vaccine. I think if people feel, governments say it's, borders are open and these are the actions you need to take to keep yourself safe, then people are traveling, as we've seen within our own domestic tourism in our own countries. People are prepared to travel if they feel safe. Whether a vaccine, I think the crucial thing is that borders are open, and they're not currently. And if it's a vaccine that means borders open, then yes, it will be a vaccine that's the key for people to travel.
Jennifer?
Totally agree. I think about 3 or 4 months ago, if you polled our guests, which we did, and our guests, just as a reminder for those who might not be familiar with them, are typically 60 plus, or they're in an older demographic. They tend to fall in that higher risk area, right, as at least identified by the CDC here in the US. And when we polled them about the vaccine, it was really thought to be the holy grail. That will be the turning point. And I think that what we've learned is that I think it will be incredibly important, but it's not going to be the holy grail. And we need the borders opening to exactly what you said, but I think it's also critical around testing that's going to accompany that. Because at least here in the US, unfortunately, among some segments of the population, the vaccine is viewed as a political football. And so while science, I do think, will prevail in all of this, there will be some hesitancy initially for the first few months when this comes out to say, is it going to be safe? Am I going to be okay if I take this? And so the recommendations of the medical community here in the US is almost going to be as critical as the vaccine itself. As I think the general feeling right now is the vaccine is not going to be 100% effective. I think if we get to 50% effective, I've heard it's going to be a home run, because that's certainly what the flu vaccine is, or tries to be every year. And so it's going to be a vaccine, definitely. I think psychologically, if nothing else, that will be a watershed moment. But we need consistent, repeated testing across all the borders. And if there's one thing I can implore the European community to do, is provide consistent, clear standards and availability for testing, because that will allow, just as we're seeing in some countries, planes to land, people to arrive, and a level of comfort and peace of mind that people will be okay. At the end of the day, this is about risk management. We don't know when this thing will ever, if ever, be eradicated. And so how do we manage this to an acceptable risk? So I think the vaccine's incredibly important, but it must be paired with consistent testing to open up the borders effectively for travel.
Okay, so look, we've got a, I suppose, prognosis which says, sometime in June next year, we'll have testing in place and a vaccine in place, and the European governments will. I appreciate I may be stretching credulity here, but European governments will have got themselves together, including the UK, and resolved on an open border policy in the light of these developments. Do you think that's going to be sufficient to stage a recovery? I mean, how quickly is it going to come? And there are two analogies here. Either it's going to be long and slow, with people gradually building momentum up, or to use another metaphor, it's going to be like the sun bursting out from behind a cloud at midday. Suddenly we'll see an inundation of people. Why don't I start with Jennifer for once? Jennifer, what do you think? What's it going to start to feel like in Q3 and Q4 next year?
Yeah, well, it's going to be a little bit of both. I think overall, though, that's going to net out to be more of a gradual recovery. There are going to be first movers, as there are with any kind of opening. I would put myself in that category. I'll get on a plane tomorrow to just about go anywhere in the world. And we have a handful of core guests who are ready to do that now. And then we also have some subset who probably say, I'm not going until 2022 or 23, if ever. But I think the vast majority will certainly are making plans for next fall, if not sooner. But it's really going to turn on in full speed for 2022. If I had a crystal ball, which gosh, I really wish I did, or a magic wand, or some state of empowerment, that is what I think could predict would happen.
Adele, what's your thinking?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think I also think it's up to us as well as tour operators and suppliers to come up with things that are ready to go at the moment that people do feel, borders are open, people are feeling safe to travel, and that could be, I think people are already working on a lot of these things, just slightly different emphasis on itineraries. One of the things that's coming up in our sector is very much hybrid trips. So, for example, where some of the, if you're talking about visiting attractions and museums and so on, where maybe the capacity levels are still lower than they would have been in the past, then perhaps you can't fit as many visits into an itinerary. So in order to maintain value for money, look at pricing, which is potentially going to be an issue if there is economic difficulties for a lot of people, then hybrid trips is something that's been talked about a lot, in the sense of having virtual reality trips to some of the places before the group travels, having their trip and then coming back and following up with some other kind of online virtual visits to make a sort of a bigger experience, but perhaps have slightly less of it traveling, as it were. So this is something we're anticipating seeing in Q3 and 4 next year, 2021, before things pick up again in 22.
If I could just jump in on that, I think you're speaking great things about innovation and the way sort of we're confronting this reality and thinking, how can we deliver great value for the money? And I think that's such an important point to emphasize. Thank you for bringing that up. And one of the things that we're seeing, which we saw actually before all this happened, ironically, it was to combat a bit of over-tourism. Remember that seems such a quaint idea now, but is really that the small is big mantra, and that is that people are looking for smaller experiences. Before it might have been to avoid the large groups, and now it's because they want that protective bubble and that ability to have that physical distance, feel safe, feel secure, but still have these great experiences. And I think what you're pointing out is how do we adapt our offerings to make sure that that's happening. And our guests are really speaking for themselves very loudly on this point. We're seeing our small group departures skyrocket in bookings on a relative basis over our classic size. We're also seeing an uptick in an interest around our private departures. So that would allow a group of 10, 12 friends or family members who might want to keep within their little travel bubble to travel then with Tauck, and then have that double insulation, if you will, of a protection and the comfort of knowing. Again, it's for, I think, as you're talking about, as we're speaking of, as I hear others here in the US industry, everyone's really figuring out how do we deliver that peace of mind. And in one way, whether it's offering a hybrid model or certainly offering smaller experiences, that enables that sense of comfort and that kind of control that people are so eager to have.
I'm just reviewing the questions which are flooding in as I speak. You'll be pleased to hear, Jennifer, that someone has said that everybody wants your wand of empowerment. You're obviously a kind of Hermione Granger role figure up there. Another person's asking, you partly answered this, and I think it's a very interesting point you raised. Is the demand going to be for smaller group sizes? I think you've partly answered that it is. But it comes tailored with the question, will people want to go to more out of the way different destinations? I've got a counter argument, but I'd be interested to hear, I mean, Adele, what's your pick on this?
Well, funnily enough, I'm going to sort of argue against that slightly. Yes, in certain sectors, absolutely. Smaller group sizes, I'm sure, and Jennifer will talk about this, I'm sure, are definitely more attractive for that exact reason of comfort. But in the school scenario, not necessarily, because as anyone who's got children in schools will know, wherever they are in the world, schools are working on a bubble scenario already. So, for example, my children are in a bubble with not only their class, but their entire year group. So from that point of view, from a school perspective, the size of the group is less important because they're already in a bubble together. So the whole class could still travel because they are already in a bubble in an everyday life at school. So from that point of view, I purely in terms of the medical side of it, I don't think so. The factor that may come into play will be an economic one, but in terms of trends from a safety point of view, I don't see the school sector being as affected by that as perhaps others are.
I mean, do you think? I mean, we ought to get on to differing destinations, but do you really think once the pandemic has passed, and I think we're going to have to reach the stage where this is history, people are going to still be worried about the virus. They'll switch to other things, surely. I mean, I'm not saying this is what I believe for one moment, but I'm really saying that the hypothesis would say that the future, the new normal, will look remarkably like the old normal. People will want to go where they've always wanted to go because their bucket list will not change. The things that were attractive 5 years ago don't suddenly become unattractive as a result of the virus. In fact, they're still there, as attractive as ever. And but a lot of the questions I'm receiving is, is there going to be a change in this? I mean, yeah. Do you think your school groups, for instance, Adele, will go to different destinations? Will they change the itineraries away from, London, Paris, Venice, Florence, and Rome to, to Birmingham, Clermont-Ferrand, and Vicenza? I've got no idea, but to me it sounds slightly implausible. But there's a big body of people who think this is the future. Do you think it's the future?
Yes and no. I think what seems to have happened in lots of areas of life, not just travel, is that the pandemic has accelerated things that were already happening. So things like online webinars, for instance. And I think in travel, certainly for my sector, there already was there's two things going on. One is, as you said earlier, this is the first trip for these particular individuals in the school trip. They won't have been, in many cases, out of the United States or Canada before. They'll, and maybe even their home state. So to go internationally, first of all, is the first thing. And if they're going to France, they're going to want to go to Paris and see Versailles and the Louvre. You can't get away from that. But we were already seeing a trend where an itinerary, the typical length would be 8 to 10 days anyway. So would be a move away from a bit of time in the main city, which it typically would be the main place they would want to see, but then sometime outside of that. We were already seeing a move towards more community engagement. How that could be in the new normal is an interesting discussion for another time maybe, but we were already seeing more movement towards authentic experiences with local people, and that generally would take place away from those key destinations. So my feeling is that this situation will accelerate that process that was happening naturally already. And I think we can't take away from the sustainability issue, which was very strong amongst young travelers in particular, and is becoming more important because of the fact that people have seen when people aren't traveling, there's less pollution, arguably, and so on. So I actually think it will accelerate that trend. But for my sector, you're always going to have the key destinations. You can't get away from it. Those are the places people want to see.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a desire to want to make a blanket statement about what Americans will want, whether they're young or older. And the fact of the matter is, I think what this has also done is segment perhaps the market more than we had seen in the past. And I think understanding those different customer needs and how those might evolve is equally important. So I think that bodes well for the ETOA membership, because I really think there's something there for everybody. It's not like cities are out and countryside is in. It might be true initially. You might see an uptick more in sort of nature-based or outdoor-based itineraries. Certainly Switzerland and Ireland are booking strong for us, and Germany booking for us now, because of those great open outdoor spaces and that sense of safety and security. But we have not written off returning to our classic size groups, of course not, because there's plenty of programs out there that people want to take and have those experiences. We're going to do it very thoughtfully. We're going to make sure that our guests are protected, that we can keep them as safe as we can. But there will, over time, always be a demand, I believe, for the kind of social engagement that people have been craving. I mean, we have all been on screens and staring at each other across the world over internet, and there is a palpable desire for human engagement. I mean, we sat here in the US and we watched Andrea Bocelli sing by himself, you know, Amazing Grace on the steps of the Duomo in Milan, and people are going to want to go there and see that. They're going to want to make sure that the Eiffel Tower is still standing. They're going to want to see Trafalgar Square, but they're also, to your point, Adele, I think is absolutely right. The level of community engagement, that ability to sit across someone and say, how did you deal with this? This has been a universal shared experience. And I think that level of compassion and empathy that we have as human beings for one another, we always say this industry is about the people, and it's more so ever than before. We are all craving that. And there's lots of science around this too that says that's going to make you happier. It's the planning and the realization of that trip to be able to look across the table of someone and have that engaged experience is something that we're going to continue to see desire for. So this is a horrible sort of, it's not a hiccup, it's a giant, you know, abyss that we've fallen into, but yes, I believe too that we will climb out of it. And where people go will largely be dependent upon their own comfort level and own risk level. And I think we've learned through all of this that people have very different profiles for that. And so the question is how do we as an industry provide at least that comfort so that everybody's willing to take that first step to let them explore how they wish?
Right, now, thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, that was very powerfully put. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to now pose a few questions to the audience. We've got a poll here, if I can work it properly, and I'm going to choose a poll. And I want to know from the audience, thinking about traveller sentiment and European product development, which of the following do you agree with? And you're going to see it open, and you need to choose one of these. Do you think travellers will be looking for less crowded destinations? Travel recovery will be domestic. Operators will offer new normal programs, and operators will offer new destinations. So these are some of the topics we've been covering up until now. We're very interested to hear your opinion. I'm going to close the poll within about 30 seconds. Whilst I'm doing so, I've got a straightforward question for both of you. What constitutes a small group? Very straightforwardly, have you got a number for a small group there? This is what the audience is asking for.
I could chime in and say our small groups average about 24 guests, but our private departures will range for as small as you'd like them to be, but they average around 10 to 12 to 14 guests.
And Adele, what's in your opinion, what is a small group?
For us, it would be under 15.
Under 15, right, okay. I'm now going to close the poll, and it's going to be closed now. And the answer is the most popular choice was that 41% of people thought that travellers are going to be looking for less crowded destinations. And then 28% that travel recovery will be led by domestic tourism. 24%, so number 3, operators will offer new normal programs, and 7% thought that operators will offer new destinations. None of these points are actually mutually exclusive, so it was rather a weird curveball to throw at you, but certainly the most popular one was that the travellers will be looking for less crowded destinations. I think on group size, if I may just sort of speak ex cathedra suddenly, I think this is fine, but speaking as an ex-group operator, and I love Jennifer's description of load factors on coaches being a classic group size. It's has a good sound to it. We're a load factor driven industry, and our job as a tour operator is to offset fixed costs against load factors, and there is huge pressure to maximize group size, and frankly, I'm all for it. Maybe this is because I'm an ex-tour guide. I much prefer seeing a full coach than an empty coach, and I think also there are real virtues in terms of its environmental impact and in terms of the impact it has in terms of congestion, of maximizing your transport use. But this is a slightly unfashionable point of view, and I'm saying clearly, if the customer wants to have smaller sizes, group sizes, and is willing to pay for it, who am I to question what customers want? I think what we're teetering towards is saying that the games, 2021, there is something there. There's going to be activity, probably nothing like the volumes that we were seeing in 2019, nothing like what we were hoping for in 2020. And I think partly the shock of what's has hit us is, as Jennifer has alluded to, is that 2020 really across the board was going to be regarded as a great year for North America. We were looking for record numbers of visitors from the US. So it looks like everything really is pointing to 2022 as being the year when we can anticipate something that looks like a normal year. It doesn't look like a sort of shield of Achilles courtesy of W.H. Jordan. I mean, it doesn't look like a battered wasteland. I suppose the first question I'd ask you is, what's going to prevent it from taking off? What's going to hold back 2022? Jennifer, I'll start with you because I always start with Adele. So let's.
Yeah, no, look, again, this is back to my wish I had a crystal ball. I think that, look, there's some chance that this virus or some new virus, right? This is, I think, these types of pandemic situations, unfortunately, I think are sort of where a lot of the challenges lie that we will have ahead. There's a chance of mutation and the like. There's always the things that are completely unpredictable that we have no control over. At this point, I think that if the four horsemen would show up, I've said this before, that I wouldn't be surprised. It's really been that kind of year. But I think 2022 is off to a solid start. And I think again, I just really go back to the concerns that still exist around health and safety and the consistency that's so demanded of policies across Europe, across the US too, for that matter. I mean, we have the same issue with our states, but that clarity that guests are so desperately seeking, to have that confidence to go. We all want some control of something, and every day, I mean, we have teams that are working on updating the new rules that are happening for countries all the time in terms of ability to enter. So if that is smoothed out, if we have the vaccine, if we have the consistent testing, I do think that 22 looks great. We are so blessed to be anchored by Tombaugh, which will be operating in 2022, which has been postponed from this year. And we saw about about 3/4 of our guests rebook immediately for that. So we expect that will be very, very strong in 2022. We were very excited too to see Floriad go forward. And so that is always, especially for our river programs, always a big anchor. And so we're quite optimistic as I stand here today, knock on wood, about 2022.
Hello.
Great, absolutely, and to not repeat Jennifer's excellent points, I'll turn it around slightly and say, what do we need in order for it to not hold it back? And I think from our point of view in 2022, there's just to pick on three things. One will be airline capacity. So we can only get people to Europe if there's airlines and slots and schedules and pricing that people can pay. And obviously, if we're looking at group travel, that means we're relying on airlines to have the capacity to still provide good group rates. And how that will look in 2022 is an open question. So that's crucial. The second thing I think that we need to have to make it a good year will be early rates and pricing, because we already in our sector would be looking at starting pricing 2022 in about 6 months' time, if not a little bit before. But I think everybody will be looking to do that because we'll all be looking ahead much further because of the current situation. So that will be crucial. And the other thing is flexibility, because we can't, I don't think as an industry, expect people to be paying hefty deposits up front with very early cancellation fees for some time, if ever again, because of the impact that those have had on people booking. So in order not to hold things back, I think we're all going to have to look at terms and conditions and how we, as an industry, move money around the supply chain, so that nobody is disadvantaged, but equally the customer at the end who's paying isn't afraid they're going to lose their money if something else, as Jennifer said, who knows what's coming. I think that has scarred everybody from their own personal holiday trips to group bookings as well. And so I think those for me are the three key things that we need in place in order to make the best success that we can of 2022.
Yeah, very well said, Adele.
Hello, on the subject of 2022, everybody watching this webinar should have received a flyer pointing out that the Global European Marketplace, which is ETOA's showpiece workshop, which is taking place on October the 30th, attended, I hasten to add, by both the panelists here, is available and still open for booking if anybody wants to take part in it. And the point about GEM is that it's the curtain raiser for planning for 2022. This is where product, particularly in the group area, is plotted and then contracted, obviously in January and February of next year for the 2022 program. So the recovery, insofar as that, well, there will be a recovery. The recovery of 2022 really starts here. And I commend you just to have a quick glance at the flyer that's been supplied. I'm going to launch another poll, if I may. I want to make sure everyone's on their toes.
Tom, while you're doing that, could I also just mention for GEM, and by the way, thank you so much to all of our partner suppliers out there. It's been quite a set of conversations we've had the last few months, so thank you very much for everyone's flexibility and cooperation. We are actually already talking about 23. I mean, I don't want to be too brash or bullish about this, but we'll be going to pricing for 22 over the next sort of quarter or so, and so we'll already be planting ideas for 23. And so the opportunity to continue in that dialogue and that conversation at GEM and other forums really helps us all stay connected and plan a solid future together.
Yeah, and I also, in honor of balanced forecasting, there are other workshops available, but GEM is the one I'm interested in. There are other workshops such as Britain and Ireland Marketplace, the Hoteliers European Marketplace, the Scandinavian Marketplace, all are available through the ETOA website. But I think more importantly, I want to hear your opinion, or as importantly, I want to hear your opinion on that. Have you noticed changing product interest requirements from clients? It's really the sort of question I'd be posing to the two people on the panel here, but I want to know what you're saying. No change, clients are seeking new health and safety requirements, clients are seeking different products, clients are seeking products away from cities, clients are more interested in small groups. So you've heard what we have to say about this. I'd be interested to know what you have to say. I've got a question here, really for both of you, but it's aimed at Jennifer. Excuse me. Which is, do you think there's going to be much? Is there much of an impact on the different border behaviour of different countries? And someone's saying here that some countries have opened themselves up completely and made testing a priority, and they cite Kenya here, and others are very, very strict, such as Hungary or Norway. Do you think this has a long-term impact on people? Jennifer, I mean, do you have an opinion on this? It'd be also interesting to hear from Adele.
I don't think it has a long-term impact, but it definitely has a short-term impact. I mean, people are prioritizing those countries that we're allowed to visit that are basically a level 3 or below from a US State Department level, but also that are open to Americans. And what we're generally seeing is those that are open to Americans are those that have testing protocols in place that are not horribly restrictive. In other words, you might require a negative PCR COVID test either 48 or 72 hours, or sometimes even longer. And this is, again, part of that inconsistency that makes it confusing. But I do believe that, well, it's not just me believing, we have asked our guests, would you feel more comfortable and would you be willing to provide a negative test for travel? And the overwhelming majority, well north of 80%, said yes, they would. And so when there are those, again, I know I'm sounding like that broken record, but when there are consistent requirements across borders, it makes it a heck of a lot easier as an operator who's also obviously working with many different countries, many different partners to provide that testing. We hope that the airlines lead the way on this, and we hope that the country borders lead the way on this, but this is certainly something that I know every operator here in the US is carefully eyeing.
Wow. Adele, do you have an angle on that?
Anissa, I totally agree with Jennifer. We've ended up with a situation where countries, even within themselves, have different, excuse me, different rules, and that makes it so hard to plan that, yeah, until there's consistency, then we can't move forward easily. Excuse me.
That's all right. Having coughs are really quite fashionable at the moment. The poll results, for what it's worth, is that the winner is that clients are more interested in small groups. 32% thought of that, hotly followed by 31% clients are seeking new health and safety reassurances. Then no change. And then really the losers in this opinion poll is that the clients are seeking new products away from cities, and clients are seeking different products altogether. So different products and destinations. So it basically, at the moment, and this is at the moment, the interest is very much in small groups and health reassurance, rather like the Tauck Care program. Those of you who are interested in that might like to look at the tour program that ETOA developed with US TOA and CATO, the Canadian Tour Operators Association, to act as some form of reassurance to clients whilst on tour. You've actually covered the question I was going to ask you, which was that Oberammergau you raised, Jennifer. There was a time when Oberammergau signaled a kind of golden rush of tourists coming to Europe. Not so much because everybody came to Oberammergau, because that's obviously got a finite number of people who can attend it, but it seemed to always pull in lots of interest and almost a sort of buzz on the European scale. Does this have an impact on the youth market at all? Do they go to Oberammergau? Adele, is this a feature of your programs?
I'm sure there are youth groups that go, but typically, no, it's not a major event for that sector. That's not to say that there aren't, and Jennifer listed a great list earlier, that events, music festivals, as in performing at festivals, are a big sector of student travel is choirs and orchestras, which is a whole other group of people who will have increasing difficulty in organising travel in the short term. But events, anniversaries, festivals, as we've always said, are really important, and increasingly so, I'm sure, in the next few years.
Right, just some more questions flowing through. Quite a serious one here. Not that we've been frivolous up until now, but this has been a devastating blow to the service economy of Europe. There's been no doubt about it. How much do you fear that there will be a material drop in the level of service? Are there going to be the things that you need for clients in 2022, 2023, if we have to wait that long? Will your suppliers survive, I suppose is the question. Will tour operators survive is another question. Why don't I start with Jennifer on that? Jennifer, Will
Sure.
suppliers survive? Will tour operators survive?
Yeah, well, there's two parts of that. There's the will they survive and what will the service levels be? And I think it's important to bring the two apart. So, look, I think we've all been blessed that our various governments have helped support us in some way. Arguably, there's much more and should be done, and that's certainly something we're lobbying for here in the U.S. to help the tourism and hospitality industry, which has obviously been flattened with trillions of dollars of loss that we're all quite aware of. So will there be some consolidation? Of course there'll be. But I've also heard the private equity markets are hotter than ever in our space because they know and can see longer term about the possible outcomes, which are quite positive at some point, right? That we've just talked about. So yes, I think there'll be shakeout. We're all going to be, dealing with this from a financial impact for quite some time. That said, I don't believe that this will have a material impact on service. Of course, just yesterday we were hearing about some of the airlines, not being able to offer perhaps the level of first or business class service that they have because of the restrictions. So will there be things that are mandated that have to perhaps alter the experience? Of course there'll be, and we've all made those adjustments and see that. Certainly just being hidden behind a mask it is challenging from a hospitality industry. But I've just actually listened to a great seminar last week where actually most of the visual cues that happen with smiling are actually cued by the eye. And so I think that it really speaks again to that power of the personality and the people that are driving this. Just here in the US, I had the great opportunity to visit MoMA after the Museum of Modern Art after it opened up. And what was equivalent to the tour guides were the frontline folks who came out to greet us as we came in. And they were positively, and especially in Manhattan, this is unusual, giddy to welcome us back to visit the museum. And I think that level of enthusiasm of we've missed you, we're so glad you're here. Aren't we all going to be so happy when we can actually see each other again and bring our guests to these great places and celebrate what we all love to do? When that happens, I think that power of experience will come through. What we have heard from other operators who have been quietly, testing and operating is exactly that. The people are so excited to be there that perhaps they might forgive some of the natural, hiccups that might happen, either mandated or accidental as we begin. I don't think that'll be long term. I think standards will still be high. Don't get me wrong, but I think that there is a bit of understanding through most of our guests about what lies ahead.
Adele.
Yeah, I mean, this has been such a difficult time for everybody. I know that everybody's been going through really difficult times, whether they're an employee, business owner, supplier, tour operator. It's been truly awful, and there's a long road to full recovery, as we've said. But for me, one of the things that has been inspiring as we've come through this first phase is the importance of the network that we have in our industry. I think we all are, as Jennifer says, we're in an industry of hospitality, so we all naturally have that need to talk to people and welcome people, and so I don't have worries for future service levels at all. And in fact, what I've seen is partnerships evolving between different suppliers coming together to provide a new kind of product maybe, or different tour operators coming together to share ideas and best practice and resources and so on. And that doesn't take away from how difficult it's been and how difficult it's going to be. But I think for me, it's this move towards partnerships that we never would have been, if we'd all been so busy this year, which is what we were all really hoping for. Some of us wouldn't have been talking to each other because we'd be so busy. And there's, as we move to recover, there's definitely going to be partnerships that have been forged through this that will help us all as we move forward. So trying to look on the bright side of that, I think some won't survive, some will survive, and by helping each other and working together, we can help more of us get through this, I'm sure.
I think it's a very serious question. I think that on the tour operator side, I think if people have made it until now, and I may be painting far too rosy a picture, but if they made it until now, they will be running on a very, very low cost base by now. and your fixed costs as a tour operator, particularly if you're a B2B tour operator, and even if you're a B2C tour operator, your fixed costs are nothing like those confronted by your suppliers. So, you know, if you're a coach company, or if you're a hotel chain or an airline, this is a different nature of capital investment that you're trying to offset through income. And I think we anticipate that most of our tour operators and intermediaries who we represent will still be here. Not most, the vast, overwhelming majority we expect to still be here at the end of next year. For suppliers, it's much, much tougher, but they've got a wider pool to sell to. They've got the domestic market, they've got the intra-European market, and they've also got our own network of intermediaries that they can sell to. So I think that you know, there's going to be an awful lot of tears between now and recovery, but I'm certain that the Europe that people visit, that they buy, will still be here. And I'm certain that most of the suppliers that we have will be there in some form or another, because the demand is there. It's one thing that's coming through in this webinar is that demand is robust and exists. Now, before we leave, I've got one more question to ask the webinar, and I suppose I can ask the panelists as we're asking the webinar. This may corrupt the results, but I don't think these results are particularly kind of scientific or sacred. So I'm going to ask the audience, and I'll ask the panelists to come up with their own answers. And it's a very straightforward. Excuse me. How interesting. Here we are. So I've got to find good. Just thinking about the recovery, when do you expect the first significant wave of visitors arriving in Europe from North America? We'll close down. And it's a three choice, 21, 22, or 23. What do we think? Adele, what do you think? When are we going to see something that looks like normal?
So I'm going to say specifically, because my sector particularly is, as I said at the beginning, spring break is one of the peak times. So February, March, April, that's when I'm going to say 2022, sort of end of the first quarter, beginning of the second.
Jennifer.
Significant wave I put as late Q3 21. We look at getting our toe in the water in the first quarter, some meaningful travel in the second, and more robust travel in the fall. So September is always our busiest month, and we hope next year and planning for next year to achieve just that.
Okay, well, I think we could, 70% of our audience has voted, now 71 has. I don't think the thing's going to change too dramatically, so I'm going to close it. And the answer is, ladies and gentlemen, that 6% of you, which is not statistically insignificant, think we're going to have to wait until 2023 before whatever you think a significant number is going to arrive. 31% says it's 2021, and 64, so 2/3 think it's going to be in 2022. I think that I just really want to ask people, is there any, you know, we've had a real sort of almost nationalist convulsion in Europe with people putting up barriers between nations, and we've had something very similar between North America and the rest of the world. The president famously stopped Europeans arriving in America some time ago because of the perceived threat they had. Do you think that long-haul visitors, and I suppose Americans in particular, do you think they're going to feel confident of being welcome? I mean, I ought to preface both this by nobody could be more welcome than an American tourist in Europe at the moment, but are they confident about feeling welcome? I've got 1 minute, Jennifer, and is this a problem?
I'd ask you that same question, or ask all of the folks on the call, because it is something we've talked about. And again, I think once we overcome the health and safety, and there's a common, again, testing and vaccine around that, I think that we hope to be welcome. I think we're seeing a little bit as bringing the plague at the moment. So we hope not to be doing that at that point. I do think I will just say on this that I do think this is where social media, which I usually think is a nemesis, can be enormously beneficial, because as those first travelers come to a destination, to show their experiences and provide that confidence to others that they are welcome, that they do feel comfortable, that there is great hospitality, that Europe is open for American travelers will have a huge impact for the rest to follow.
Well, thank you. Adele, is this an
Yeah.
issue, or?
I would agree. A few months ago, I think I was feeling it was a stronger issue about Americans not necessarily feeling they would be welcome. But I think as we've gone through this process and everybody's not allowed to travel anywhere, I think we're all in the same position. And once people start traveling again, I think there will just be so much happiness that people can leave home and go somewhere else, that ultimately, exactly what Jennifer said, I'm sure social media, influencers, all the rest of it will be so important in being welcome back. But I think it's something we have to be aware of, but I'm not as worried about it as I maybe was a few months ago.
Right. There's someone from Slovenia saying that all Americans are welcome, particularly Mrs. Trump. I will, with that thought, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, audience, for being such a fantastic webinar audience. Jennifer, Adele, thank you so much for spending the time sharing your expertise with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Until
everybody.
next time.
Thank you.
And I'll see everybody at GEM. Do come to GEM. Take care. Bye-bye.